Welcome back to BeFM Drama, where all this week we're bringing you our 5-part adaptation of A Scandal in Bohemia by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this third episode of the program, Sherlock Holmes and Watson have been contracted by the desperate King of Bohemia, who is trying to prevent Irene Adler, a famed opera singer and American adventuress, from blackmailing him with evidence of their illicit romance. The thread of European history hangs in the balance as the brilliant detective rushes to recover the compromising photographs that could shatter empires here on BeFM. Join me, your host, Joshua Cornwell, as I take the role of Dr. Watson in this exciting episode from BeFM Drama. At 3 o'clock the next afternoon, I arrived at Baker Street and found that Holmes was out. The landlady informed me he'd left the house just after 8 in the morning. I sat down beside the fire with the intention of waiting for him, however long it might take. I was deeply interested in the case. Its scandalous nature and the nobility of the client gave it a character all its own. And there was the pleasure of seeing my friend at work again. There was something in his masterly grasp of every situation and in his incisive reasoning that made it a joy to study his way of working, to follow the quick, subtle methods by which he untangled even the most complex mysteries. I was so used to his invariable success that the possibility of his failure had ceased to enter into my mind. It was almost 4 before the door opened, and a drunken-looking cab driver with an inflamed face and disreputable clothing, shaggy with sideburns, walked into the room. As familiar as I was with Holmes's amazing ability to disguise himself, I still had to look 3 times before I was sure that it was him. With a sly nod, he disappeared into his bedroom and reappeared 5 minutes later in a tweed suit, looking as respectable as any gentleman. He put his hands into his pockets, stretched out his legs in front of the fire, and laughed heartily for several minutes without stopping. He laughed until he cried, then choked, then laughed again until he had to lie back, limp and helpless, in his chair.
Well, really.
What is it?
It's too funny. You can never guess how I spent my morning or what I ended up doing.
I can't imagine, but I think it's likely that you've been watching the neighborhood and house of Miss Irene Adler.
Quite so, but what happened next was rather unusual. I left the house a little after 8 in character as a cabbie out of work. There is a wonderful camaraderie among horsemen. If you're one of them, you'll learn all there is to know. I soon arrived at Adler's home in Bryony Lodge. It is a lovely villa with a garden at the back 2 stories high, large sitting room on the right side, well-furnished, long windows with those ridiculous English window locks that even a child could open. Other than that, there was nothing remarkable. I walked around and examined it closely from every angle. As I expected, there was a line of stables in the lane behind the house. I gave one of the stable masters a hand in rubbing down the horses and received in exchange 2 pence, a glass of beer, 2 pipeloads of shag tobacco, and as much information as I could ask for about Miss Adler.
And what did you learn about her?
Oh, she has turned all the men's heads down in that part. She is the most beautiful thing under a bonnet on the planet, so say the Bryony Lodge stablemen to a man. Miss Adler lives quietly, sings at concerts, drives out at 5 every day, and returns at 7 sharp for dinner. Never goes out any other time except to sing. Has had just 1 male visitor, but sees a lot of him. He is dark, handsome, dashing, never visits less than once a day, and often twice. His name is Mr. Godfrey Norton. The stablemen have driven him back and forth to his home a dozen times for Bryony Lodge and knew all about him. Once I'd listened to all my friends knew, I sat myself down on the pavement to watch the house and think over my plan of attack.
Who is this Godfrey Norton?
Evidently an important factor in this matter. He's a lawyer. That sounded ominous. What was the relation between him and Adler and the purpose of his repeated visits? Was she his client, friend, or mistress? If he was her lawyer, she'd probably transferred the photograph to his protection. If she was his mistress, that was less likely. I was just wondering whether to remain at Bryony Lodge or turn my attention to Godfrey Norton when the absurd thing happened. I fear that I bore you with all these details, but I have to let you see my little difficulties if you are so to understand the situation.
I am following you closely.
I was balancing the matter in my mind when a cab drove up to Bryony Lodge and a gentleman sprang out. He was remarkably handsome, dark-haired, and mustached. Clearly, Mr. Norton! He appeared to be in a great hurry. He shouted to the cabman to wait and rushed past the maid, who had opened the door for him. He was in the house for about half an hour. Presently, he emerged looking even more flustered than before. As he walked up to the cab, he pulled a watch from his pocket, looked at it intently. "Drive like the devil," he shouted, "to the Church of St. Monica in the Edgware Road. Half a guinea if you shall do it in 20 minutes.
A church? Is this Norton a devout fellow?
I wouldn't know. I was wondering whether or not I should follow him when a neat little carriage pulled up. It had hardly stopped before Adler shot out of the hall and got in. I only saw her for a moment, but she was lovely, with a face a man might die for. "To the Church of St. Monica," she cried, "and half a sovereign if you reach it in 20 minutes. Can you imagine what I did next?
You caught a cab to the Church of St. Monica?
Quite so, and yelled, "Half a sovereign if you reach in 20 minutes," to the driver. I had an idea of where things were leading. I don't think I've ever had a faster ride, but the others got there before me. The cab and the carriage with their sweating horses stood in front of the church when I arrived. I paid the cabbie and hurried inside. There wasn't a soul there except for Adler and Norton, and a surprised clergyman who seemed to be arguing with them. They were all standing in a group in front of the altar. I was wandering up the side aisle like any other idle afternoon drunk who has stumbled inside a church, when suddenly, to my surprise, the three faces at the altar turned towards me, and Godfrey Norton ran my way as fast as he could.
Did they realize that you had followed them?
Hardly. "Thank God," Norton cried. "You'll do. Come, we need a best man, otherwise it won't be legal. Just 3 minutes, please."
What then?
I was half dragged to the altar, and before I knew it, I found myself repeating responses that were whispered in my ear, vouching for things I knew nothing about, and generally assisting in the secure unification of Irene Adler and Godfrey Norton in holy marriage. It was done in an instant, and then Norton was thanking me on one side, while Irene Adler thanked me on the other, and the clergyman smiled down at me with holy beneficence. It was the most ridiculous position I've ever found myself in. I couldn't stop laughing just now thinking about it. It seems that there was some informality in the couple's arrangement, and that the clergyman had refused to marry them without a witness of some kind. My lucky appearance saved the bridegroom from having to rush out into the street searching for a best man. Adler gave me a sovereign. I think I'll have it hammered into my watch chain to commemorate the occasion.
This is a very unexpected turn of affairs.
I can't disagree with you there, Watson. It looked as if the pair would make an immediate departure, requiring some quick decision-making on my part. At the church door, however, the newlyweds went their separate ways, she to her own house and he to his. "I shall ride out to the park at 5 as usual," she said, and she left. They drove off in opposite directions, and I went off to make my own arrangements.
Which were?
Some cold beef and a glass of beer. I've been too busy to think of food, and I'll likely be even busier tonight. By the way, Doctor, I shall need your cooperation.
I would be delighted to help.
Indeed. There's just one thing.
What is it? I'm sure it won't dissuade me.
You don't mind breaking the law, do you?
What on earth does Sherlock Holmes have in mind for his stalwart companion, Dr. Watson? And how does it connect with his plans to secure Irene Adler's scandalous photograph of the King of Bohemia? And what of Irene Adler, or perhaps now Irene Norton's, marriage? Where could this story lead, and what laws might the good doctor be breaking? Tune in tomorrow evening to find out here on BeFM Drama.